The ghostly signal. Princess Vena sat in the command seat of her royal cruiser, gazing at the endless void of space through the wide observation window. The exhilarating empire ruled over hundreds of star systems, and she had traveled across many of them. Yet space always made her feel small. It was a quiet journey, too quiet. The usual hum of distant communication signals was absent, and the deep space scanners showed nothing but empty space. The silence was unsettling. Then the ship's warning system beeped. "Your Highness, we are detecting an unknown signal," reported one of the navigators. His voice was tense, as if he, too, sensed something unnatural about it. "A signal?" Vena frowned. "What kind of signal?" The officer hesitated, his fingers moving rapidly across the control panel as he analyzed the data. "It's old. Incredibly old. The frequency is ancient, predating even the Dominion's records." That made no sense. Every empire, every species, used modernized frequencies for communication. Anything this old should have been lost to time. "Where is it coming from?" Vena asked, leaning forward. The screen flickered, and a red blip appeared on the holographic map. A single point of unknown origin. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was moving. It was following them. "Is it a ship?" she asked, her heart beating faster. "We don't know," the officer admitted. "It's not giving off any standard energy readings. It's almost like a ghost." Vena's breath caught in her throat. She had heard ghost stories before, tales of ships lost in the dark of space, drifting for eternity. Some said they belonged to the lost race of humanity, but those were just myths. Humanity had been erased from history long ago. The signal pulsed again. Her communications officer quickly ran it through translation software, and the result made the entire bridge fall silent. The words appeared on the screen in a language that should have been long extinct. "You are not alone." A shiver ran down Vena's spine. She stood up, staring at the screen as if willing it to make sense. "Is this a joke?" she whispered. "No, Your Highness," the officer replied, his voice shaking. "Someone is out there, and they know we are here." The ship's lights flickered for a brief moment. A deep, rumbling sound vibrated through the hull, so faint it could almost be imagined. But Vena knew it was real. Something was watching them. "Try to establish contact," she commanded. The officer hesitated before nodding, attempting to respond now. The message was simple: identify yourself. For a long, tense moment, there was no reply. The bridge crew waited, barely breathing. Then suddenly, the signal changed. The once weak blip on their screen expanded into something larger. It was no longer just a signal. It was a ship, and it was ancient. Vena's blood ran cold as her scanners finally locked onto the shape emerging from the darkness. A warship, black as the void itself, and unmistakably human. The warship loomed in the void, its shape unlike anything Vena had ever seen. It was vast, its black hull seeming to absorb the starlight around it. There were no visible insignias, no markings that could identify it. But deep in the historical archives, buried under centuries of Dominion censorship, she had seen depictions of similar vessels, human warships. The very idea sent a shudder down her spine. It couldn't be possible. Humanity had been erased, their worlds turned to dust, their fleets wiped from the stars. The Dominion had seen to that. And yet here, drifting in the abyss of space, was a ship that should not exist. The bridge crew remained frozen, their screens flooded with warnings. The alien vessel was scanning them, its unreadable technology probing through their defenses with a precision that no known species could match. Then, another message appeared on the screen. "Your silence speaks volumes. You were not meant to see us, yet here you are, a witness to history." The voice that followed was deep, commanding, and undeniably human. Vena felt her throat tighten. This was no ghost, no lost echo from the past. There was someone, something, alive on that ship. The weight of her realization crushed her. The Exhilarating had ruled the stars for thousands of years, their empire unchallenged since the fall of humanity. Every species knew the legend. The Dominion had wiped out the humans, fearing their unpredictable nature, their refusal to submit, their terrifying adaptability. But whispers of their survival had never fully died. Vena had dismissed them as nonsense, as all rulers did. Now she was staring at proof that the greatest lie in galactic history was crumbling before her eyes. The silence on the bridge stretched unbearably long. No one dared speak. Then the warship moved. It did not activate weapons. It did not raise shields. It simply drifted closer, as if assessing them in return. The exhilarating fleet prided itself on its technological supremacy, but their scanners barely penetrated the warship's outer hull. Whatever material it was made of, it was beyond anything the Dominion had ever encountered. Vena turned to her communication officer, her voice sharp. "Try again. Open a secure channel." The officer hesitated but complied. "Unidentified vessel, this is Princess Vena of the Exhilarating Empire. You have entered restricted space. Identify yourself immediately." Static filled the speakers. Then the voice returned. "Restricted? By whose authority?" There was no aggression in the tone, only amusement. Vena's pulse quickened. Whoever this was, they were unafraid. Either they didn't recognize exhilarating authority, or worse, they didn't care. A deep unease settled in her gut. The Dominion had wiped out humanity's fleets so long ago that their own warships had grown complacent. The Exhilarating had spent centuries crushing lesser civilizations, enforcing their rule with overwhelming force. But something about this moment felt different. For the first time in her life, Vena sensed that she was the one standing before something far greater. The warship adjusted its position again. It was no longer drifting. It was deliberately maneuvering, its movements too precise, too controlled. This was not a derelict wreck from a forgotten war. This was a fully functional ship, and it had chosen to reveal itself. A new message flashed on the screen. "You claim authority over this sector, yet you do not understand its history. You walk in the ruins of an empire that never truly fell." Vena clenched her fists. "Who are you?" she demanded. Another pause. Then the final words came through, words that sent ice through her veins. "We are the lost. We are the forgotten. But we are not gone. You stand in the presence of a warship that once shook the heavens. And we have returned." Vena's breath came shallow. The weight of the words settled like a storm upon her. If this was real, if a human warship had survived all this time, then the greatest secret of the Dominion had just been exposed. The myths were not myths. The ghosts were not ghosts. Humanity was not extinct. And if one ship had survived, then how many more were out there, hidden in the dark? The silence on the bridge was suffocating. Every officer, every crew member, even the most battle-hardened veterans of the Exhilarating fleet, remained frozen in place, staring at the screen as if afraid to breathe. The human warship had spoken again, its voice carrying the weight of an era thought lost. Vena's fingers curled against the armrest of her command chair, her mind racing through possibilities. Was this a trick? Some rogue faction using human myths to inspire fear? Or was this truly what it claimed to be, a remnant of a species that had been erased from history? The ship had done nothing hostile, yet its very existence was a declaration of war. If humanity had truly survived, if even one warship remained, then the Dominion's greatest crime was no longer buried. And that meant the fragile peace they had built upon that lie was about to shatter. Her second-in-command finally found his voice, his words a near whisper. "Your Highness, orders." He was afraid. They all were. Not because the warship had fired, but because it hadn't. A ship of that size, of that unknown technology, could have obliterated them the moment they detected it. But it had chosen to reveal itself. And that meant it had something far more dangerous than just weapons. It had a purpose. Vena exhaled slowly, then straightened. "We need to know what we're dealing with. Open the channel again." No commands. No threats. Just ask them. Why? The officer hesitated but obeyed, his hands shaking slightly as he sent the transmission. Unidentified vessel, what is your purpose here? A heartbeat passed, then another. The ship, still drifting at an almost lazy pace, finally responded. You ask why? After all this time? The voice carried something new now, something Vena had not expected. A quiet fury, restrained yet unshaken. Perhaps you should ask your ancestors. Ask them why they feared us. Ask them why they erased us. Ask them why they lied to you. The words hit like a blow. A ripple of unease spread across the bridge. None of them had answers to that. The official records were clear. Humanity had been wiped out for the stability of the galaxy, for the survival of the many. That was the truth every species had been taught. But the man speaking now did not sound like a ghost of the past. He sounded very real, and very much alive. Vena felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. The Dominion's greatest fear had never been humanity's weapons. It had been their defiance, their refusal to kneel, their ability to adapt to any threat. And if even one of their warships had endured, then maybe, just maybe, the Dominion's purge had failed. Her instincts screamed at her. The logical choice was to call for reinforcements, to bring the full force of the fleet down on this relic and erase it before it could spread its truth. But something held her back. Something in the way the warship moved, the way it spoke, the way it had not once threatened them. It was watching, studying, judging, as if waiting for her next move to decide its own. Vena made her decision. Transmit a message to the High Command. Secure channel. Tell them we have encountered an anomaly, and that history may not be as dead as we were told. The officers looked at her, some in shock, others in quiet understanding. One by one, they obeyed. The message was sent. The truth was set in motion. And in the silence that followed, the warship lingered, as if listening, as if waiting. Then, without a word, it turned. The engines flared to life, and the impossible ship faded back into the void, leaving behind only questions, only uncertainty, and the terrifying realization that this was just the beginning. The silence on the bridge stretched long after the human warship had disappeared from their sensors. No one dared to speak, as if fearing that even acknowledging what had just happened would shatter the fragile reality they were clinging to. Vena sat still in her command chair, her mind racing through possibilities. The High Command would demand explanations, proof, and most importantly, a decision. The truth was dangerous. If word spread that a human warship had survived, that the Dominion's greatest purge had not erased them entirely, the very foundation of the galactic order could crumble. Wars had been waged over less. Lies had been upheld for centuries with far weaker justifications, and yet she could not shake the feeling that something far bigger was at play. The humans had not attacked. They had not issued threats. They had simply made their presence known and then vanished. It was a message in itself, one that carried a weight she was still struggling to understand. Her second-in-command finally spoke, his voice uncertain. Your Highness, should we pursue? We can track their trajectory. At the very least, we should. He hesitated, swallowing hard before continuing. We should confirm if it was truly a human vessel. The words felt absurd even as he said them. There was no doubt about what they had seen. The ship's design matched ancient records almost perfectly, but the technology it displayed was beyond anything the Dominion had ever known. A warship that should not exist, from a people that should have been long dead, moving with the grace and confidence of something that had never been lost to time. If the Dominion had underestimated the humans once before, it could not afford to do so again. Vena exhaled slowly, gripping the armrests of her chair. No pursuit, she said firmly. Not yet. She could feel the unease ripple through the crew, but no one challenged her. They were trained soldiers, sworn to follow orders, but they were also witnesses to something the rest of the galaxy had deemed impossible. Fear was natural, but so was curiosity. The Dominion had taught them that humans were extinct, that their legacy was nothing but a cautionary tale. But reality had just shattered that illusion. And if one lie had been exposed, how many more remained? A deep unease settled in her chest. The warship had spoken with purpose, with knowledge of the past. If humans had been truly wiped out, where had this one come from? And if there was one, could there be more? The implications were staggering. If humanity had survived in secret, biding its time, then the Dominion was in danger in ways it could not yet comprehend. This was not just a ghost from the past. This was a reminder, a warning, perhaps even a promise. And if there was one thing she knew about the stories of old, it was that humans never made empty promises. She turned to her crew, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her mind. We report what we saw. Nothing more, nothing less. Until we understand the truth, we do not act recklessly. The officers exchanged glances, some hesitant, others relieved. They wanted answers just as much as she did, but they also feared what those answers could bring. One thing was certain, this encounter had changed everything. And whether the Dominion was ready or not, the truth was coming. Vena's mind raced as she sat in her command chair, her fingers gripping the armrests as though anchoring herself to reality. The weight of what she had seen, of what they had all witnessed, pressed down on her like a collapsing star. The human warship should not exist. The stories, the ancient records, the countless warnings passed down through generations, none of it should have mattered because humans were supposed to be extinct. And yet there it was, its silhouette burned into her mind like an afterimage, a specter from a past that refused to die. Her crew remained tense, their eyes flicking between each other, desperate for someone to break the silence. No one wanted to be the first to speak of it, as if doing so would make it real, as if saying the words aloud would summon the impossible ship back into existence. It was the kind of fear that came from knowing the truth had been hidden for too long, and now that it had surfaced, there was no going back. Finally, her second-in-command, Varric, cleared his throat. "Your Highness," he began carefully, his voice measured but strained. "We should send a report to High Command immediately. They need to know what we saw." His tone was practical, but there was something else beneath it. Anxiety, uncertainty. Vena didn't respond immediately. The logical part of her agreed. This was not something that could be ignored. But the instinct buried deep within her told her that sending a report was the worst possible decision. High Command would react with paranoia, with fear, with overwhelming force. The Dominion had spent centuries convincing itself that humanity was a myth, a mistake erased from history. If the leaders of the Dominion were confronted with undeniable proof of humanity's survival, they would not hesitate. They would send fleets. They would burn entire systems if necessary. They would do whatever it took to make sure the lie remained intact. She turned her gaze to Varric, her golden eyes unreadable. "And what exactly do we tell them?" she asked. "That we saw a ghost from the past. That the Dominion's greatest war, the one that shaped our empire, was a failure. That the enemy we erased from history is still out there, stronger than ever." Varric hesitated. He had no answer, and he knew it. The truth was too dangerous, and yet the weight of secrecy was unbearable. "We can't just pretend this didn't happen," he argued, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "No," Vena agreed. "We can't." She exhaled, closing her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, she had made her decision. "We will report an unidentified vessel with anomalous readings. No mention of humans. No mention of what we truly saw." Murmurs of unease spread through the crew. Some were relieved, others confused, but none dared to challenge her. "Your Highness," Varric said carefully, "if High Command finds out we withheld information—" "They won't," she cut in sharply, "because no one on this bridge will say otherwise." She let her gaze sweep across the room, meeting each officer's eyes one by one. "I need every single one of you to understand what is at stake. The moment we confirm humanity's survival, the Dominion will retaliate. They will see it as a threat that must be wiped out before it can rise again. And what if humans are ready this time? What if that warship was only a fraction of their strength? The weight of her words settled over them, and slowly understanding dawned. The Dominion believed itself to be unchallenged, the rulers of the galaxy. But if humans had been waiting in the shadows, rebuilding, preparing, then everything the Dominion believed about itself was a lie. A young officer hesitantly raised her voice. What if they come back? Vena turned her gaze toward the main view screen, where the void stretched endlessly before them. The ship had vanished, but the message it left behind was undeniable. They will, she murmured. And when they do, we need to decide whether we want to be their enemies or their allies. Vena couldn't sleep. The image of the warship haunted her, its towering form seared into her mind like a phantom from another age. Every instinct screamed that this was not just an anomaly. This was the beginning of something far bigger than anyone in the Dominion could comprehend. She stood alone in her private chambers, staring out at the vastness of space. Her personal console displayed the heavily edited report she had prepared for High Command. Carefully worded, strategically vague. It would buy them time. But time for what? To prepare, to understand, or to choose a side. A soft chime echoed through her quarters. A private transmission. She frowned. Few would dare contact her directly, especially at this hour. She hesitated for only a moment before accepting the call. The holographic form of an elder Dominion official flickered to life before her. His face was weathered with age, his eyes sharp with wisdom and secrets. Chancellor Vorian, a man who had been alive during the last war, a man who, if rumors were true, had seen the fall of the last human stronghold with his own eyes. Your Highness, he greeted, his voice neutral. I received your report. Vena straightened, keeping her expression unreadable. Then you know the situation is unusual. Vorian studied her, his silence stretching long enough to make her uneasy. Finally, he spoke. Your report was careful, too careful. I expected more from someone with your insight. Her pulse quickened. He knew, or at the very least, he suspected. But how? Had someone spoken? Had the warship done more than just appear? Had it sent a message elsewhere? You omitted details, Vorian continued. I need to know why. She chose her next words carefully, because I do not believe High Command would react wisely to them. Vorian gave a slow nod, as if confirming something he had already suspected. So you saw it too. Her breath caught. Saw what? He leaned forward, his expression unreadable. The ship. The warship that should not exist. The legend they swore was nothing but fiction. Vena's grip tightened at her sides. You knew, she whispered. Vorian exhaled, his gaze distant. Not for certain. But I have spent decades sifting through buried records, erased files, and quiet rumors. I have always believed that something was missing from the story we were told. Humanity's destruction was too absolute, too clean. The Dominion does not erase threats so perfectly, not without consequences. Vena swallowed hard. And now we have proof. Vorian's eyes darkened. And now we stand at a crossroads. He regarded her carefully. What do you intend to do, Your Highness? She hesitated, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The Dominion expected obedience. Vena stood motionless in front of the viewport, her thoughts spinning. The silence of space seemed heavier now, as if the very stars themselves were watching, waiting for something. Her fingers gently brushed the surface of the console, feeling the coolness of the material beneath her fingertips, the weight of the choices she had made. And the one still ahead of her felt like a mountain pressing down on her chest. She could hear the soft hum of her ship's engines in the background, a reassuring reminder of her place within the Dominion's fleet. But her mind was far from the comfort of her surroundings, the human warship, the legends of Earth's past. She had always thought of them as myths, stories told to frighten children, and to explain why humanity had disappeared from the stars so long ago. Now one of those myths had returned. and she had no idea what it meant. Turning from the window, Vena paced the length of her quarters. She had always prided herself on being prepared, on being a strategist who could see every angle, every possibility. But this was different. The human ship had appeared out of nowhere, like a ghost from the past, and she had no way of knowing what it would do next. The Dominion would demand answers. They would want to attack, to destroy this unknown threat before it could become something more. But Vena knew that was the wrong move. If the humans had returned, it would be a mistake to underestimate them. After all, no one had ever truly understood how they had vanished in the first place. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had to make a decision. A choice that would shape the future of not just the Dominion, but the entire galaxy. If she ignored the warning signs, if she allowed the Dominion to attack the humans on sight, they could make a terrible mistake, one that might cost them everything. Vena walked over to the communication console and activated a secure line. She needed to speak to someone she could trust. The screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face, an ally from the past. Captain Theron, a skilled officer with a reputation for being cautious and smart. He had served under her during several missions and had always had a keen sense of what needed to be done. "Captain," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I need your help." Theron's eyes narrowed as he sensed the urgency in her tone. "Of course, Your Highness. What's happened?" Vena took a deep breath. "A human ship has appeared on our radar, one of the old warships, the ones from the legends." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Theron's face remained unreadable, but Vena could see the shift in his expression. He had heard the stories too. Everyone had. But now it was real. "Do you believe it's a threat?" Theron asked. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do know this. We cannot act recklessly. We need more information. I'm not willing to risk everything on the assumption that the humans are a forgotten enemy." Theron nodded slowly, a sign that he understood. "What are you proposing?" "I'm going to send a team to investigate. I need someone on the ground to make contact, to find out what the humans want. And I need someone who can keep this quiet, at least for now." The captain's gaze softened. "I'll gather a team. We'll be discreet. But be careful, Your Highness. The Dominion will not tolerate hesitation." Vena nodded. "I know, but I'm not just a leader of the Dominion. I'm a leader of the future." She paused, her voice growing quieter. "And that future might not be what we expect." The communication ended, leaving Vena alone with her thoughts again. The decision had been made. A team would be dispatched to find out what the humans wanted. And whatever they discovered, it would change the galaxy forever. But the human warship was still out there, waiting, watching. And Vena couldn't help but feel that, just beyond the stars, something far more dangerous was drawing closer. She would need to be ready for whatever came next. After all, the legends had never been fully understood. The truth was far more complex and far more deadly than anyone had ever imagined. And as the shadows of the past crept ever closer, Vena knew one thing for certain. Humanity was not gone. They were back.